Alaikum assalam. Secretary Baker, Ambassador Kislyak, Consul General Babic, members of the Consular Corps, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's truly my pleasure to welcome you here this evening. There are arguably few more important bilateral relationships in the world than that between the Russian Federation and the United States. And tonight's speaker is uniquely qualified to address it. The two countries have much in common. Russia and the United States are vast continental powers with broad interests in the Atlantic and Pacific regions, as well as the Middle East and South Asia. Both are home to large multi-ethnic and multi-confessional populations, and both have shared interests in a wide range of international issues, such as reducing nuclear arsenals, combating terrorism, stabilizing financial markets, and restoring global economic growth. One important area for cooperative endeavor is space exploration, and I am pleased to note that at the Baker Institute, under the leadership of our senior fellows George Abbey and Neil Lane, we have led a high-level dialogue here and in Moscow with Russia's Roscosmos and space scientists for many years. This long-standing initiative represents a very real and important measure of collaboration on an issue once marked by rivalry and competition. Another area for potential collaboration, of course, is the critical area of energy policy. Russia ranks among the world's most important oil and natural gas producers. Given its large proven reserves, Russia has enormous potential to enhance its status as a global natural gas supplier. The question is, what does the changing global energy outlook mean for Russia? And here again, the Baker Institute's Energy Forum has held several conferences in Moscow and here on key energy issues affecting both our countries and the global energy market. We should, however, recognize the differences. Sometimes important differences divide Moscow and Washington. NATO expansion and human rights are just two of them. In approaching these differences, it is vitally important that both countries seek common ground, as Secretary Baker in a private conversation with the ambassador just underscored, when it is possible, and restrain rhetoric when it is not. The Russo-American relationship is simply too important, not just for the two countries, but for the world, to allow it to deteriorate into mutual recrimination and mistrust. Where interests converge, we must seek opportunities to cooperate. Where they diverge, we may sometimes have to simply agree to disagree. On a personal note, let me say that serving at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow between 1979 and 1981 was one of the highlights of my and my wife's diplomatic career. Here at the Baker Institute, we have had the pleasure and honor of hosting Russian participants, including Russian leaders such as President Mikhail Gorbachev and President Vladimir Putin. Now it is my privilege to introduce our speaker. Our guest tonight has led a long and very distinguished diplomatic career. He joined the Russian Foreign Ministry in 1977. He served in New York, Washington, Moscow. He's been Russia's ambassador to the Kingdom of Belgium. He served as Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, where he played a key role on arms control and non-proliferation issues. He's one of the leading experts in Russia on these critical issues and is now very much involved in the ongoing negotiations between the United States and Russia. Last year, our speaker was appointed the ambassador of the Russian Federation to the United States. We are honored that he is with us this evening, and let me tell you that he has come despite the fact that his minister has been on the phone to him saying, "We need you in Washington. We need you in Washington." He got on a plane, he came, and we are truly, we really appreciate your coming and committing at least your commitment to living up to your commitment to the Baker Institute. So please join me in warmly welcoming Ambassador Sergey Kislyak to the Baker Institute.
Secretary Baker, Ambassador Georgian, thank you very much for inviting me here. It's a real thrill to be here. The Rice University is a university that is known throughout the world, including in Russia. And the institute that you are heading is certainly a formidable force in forging the intellectual work in international relations. Mr. Baker asked me to start my brief discourse with explaining a little bit from my history. I only have one story to tell, because otherwise Mr. Georgian told me almost everything about myself. And the story is that in '89 I was leaving Washington after almost 8 years working in the States. And my little kid, my daughter, asked me, "Father, are you satisfied with the work here in the States?" I said, "Yes." "Did you do an important job?" I said, "Yes." "Are you important?" I said, "I think so." "Do you know the Secretary of State?" I said, "Yes." She pondered a little bit and asked, "Does he know you?" I still owe her an answer. Secretary Baker, I'm glad that I will be able to give her an answer when I return. On Russian-American relations, you know, I started my day here in visiting NASA. And it was a very interesting experience. I have been working on Russian-American relations for quite a long period of time, including on space projects that were our own priority for quite a long period of time, and then we turned them into joint effort together with the United States. It was amazing to see several Russian cosmonauts wandering around NASA facility, training there, and fully understanding that at the same time American astronauts are training in Russia. I was speaking to them how it was for them to work here, to train here, and what is the most amazing, they were looking at me, of course, very politely, but not fully understanding why the question. NASA people and Russian space people are doing the same job, do it together, because it serves best interest of the United States, it serves the best interest of Russia, and they do it together. They have acquired a lot of experience of doing it together, and I was listening to the people in NASA with some of those wonderful specialists and commanding a lot of respect. And I thought that most probably it's one of the areas where our interests fully coincide, and one of the areas that has become almost immune from ups and downs in our political relations. Our political relations have always been very complex. They are not easy now either. We have lived through ups and downs lately. Moscow calling. And I would say when I arrived as ambassador to, thank you, Secretary. When I arrived to the States in September last year, it was quite different environment in Russian-American relations. And I would dare to say that most probably it was the lowest point in our relations after the Cold War. And a year has elapsed. It's quite different. A lot of things have changed. A lot of things have become known. In September last year, when we arrived here together with my wife, we were astonished by the lack of understanding of what was happening in Ossetia and why we were there, protecting lives of Russians and the Ossetians, who sometimes were also Russian citizens. We were protecting lives which are as dear to us as any American life is dear to the Americans. And the degree of misunderstanding of the situation, degree of support of the lies that were going from the other side was astonishing to me, despite the fact that I had been working here for quite a long period of time and working on the Russian-American relations for quite a long period of time. I didn't expect this. I had always thought that U.S. society, U.S. government would have been much better informed, at least, to take right decisions. Even the press here, you might recollect the press coverage of the events at that time. There were cases where American TV channels were picking up Russian footage of carnage caused by the Georgian army bombarding sleeping quarters in Syrian capital and saying Russians are entering Georgia. It was very difficult for our relations. We are hopefully out of it now, but it shows how fragile our relations are and how they are, how easy to change the good tendencies that are built by years and years of diligent work, and how easy to convert them in something that would be almost confrontational. The reason, most probably, stereotypes. I think that the Americans see Russia sometimes looking at Russia and seeing the Soviet Union, together with the Soviet Union, seeing extension of the policies of the Cold War and extending the reaction, the American reaction to the Cold War situation. The same is true sometimes in Russia towards America as well. I'm not suggesting that it's only in the United States that there are stereotypes. We also do have stereotypes sometimes. And most probably, if you ask me what is the biggest problem in our relation, as stereotyping each other and trying to define your policy not based on the facts, but rather on perceptions as to what the other side is, sometimes basing your assumptions on the worst case scenario. We need to work on this, and it's not going to happen tomorrow. But at the same time, I think the steps are made in the right direction, and we are developing ties bit by bit, doing, I think, a decent job in developing arms control development that will extend what Secretary Baker started as a strategic arms reductions treaty that expires December 5. And as we speak, our negotiators are working in Geneva in order to have a follow-on agreement. It's as difficult as as it had been always in terms of professional negotiations. However, the atmosphere of the negotiations is good, and we are hopeful that the treaty will be coming within a short period of time. We are working on developing economic relations, and I would dwell on this a little bit more, because I think that the current level of economic relations between Russia and the United States is not only adequate, but it doesn't provide for a kind of economic backup for the good and stable, predictable relations between Russia and the United States. However, some tendencies are good. In 2008, by the end of 2008, we had a turnover both ways in economic exchange, amounting to $36 billion. Sounds almost impressive. But if you compare this with the amount of trade that the United States has annually with the other countries, it's only 1% of the American trade. The U.S. isn't our biggest economic partner either. You hardly make it within a dozen of our privileged economic counterparts. That means that if Russia disappears tomorrow, your economy most probably wouldn't notice this. If U.S. disappears tomorrow, our economy most probably notice it, but wouldn't suffer. And it means that the economic relations haven't become a factor that solidify seriously relations between our country. But I think that is one of the avenues that needs to be explored, developed, and some things are already in the offing. At the same time, the tendencies are good, because some 4 to 5 years prior to that, our turnover was only $9 billion. That means in 4 years, we have quadrupled the amount of trade between our two countries. So dynamics were pretty good. And this year, that will be lower because of the crisis, of course. And I do not know what we will have as a final figures, but most probably we'll lose about 30% of the trade, plus minus. But it will recover afterwards, together with the recovery economic in the States, in Europe, and in Russia as well. At the same time, there are new tendencies that are good. and should be encouraged. The U.S. had been investing in the Russian economy for quite a long period of time. You have accumulated about $30 billion worth of investments so far. It's not too big a number for the size of economy of the United States, but still important. After the meeting between President Bush and President Putin then at Bratislava, they had agreed that both sides would be encouraging investment in economy of each other. That was the first time that we decided to encourage investment by Russian private business in a different country. It was the United States. Since then, Russian business invested $12 billion in the American economy. And what is amazing that within the last 3 to 4 years, your business invested $8 billion into Russia, and our business invested $8 billion. So we are even. But as a result of it, your companies have improved your international status, and now companies have acquired some global status that is important for capitalization of the stocks. We today produce, I think, 1/3 of the steel produced in the United States. When I say we, that means Russian capital. And I've spoken in some states with people who work with Russian-owned companies here. And they all are thrilled to work with them because they're as good as anybody else, and they provide jobs. They are as much interested in efficiency, and they provide jobs for companies that are serving their companies. So they are welcome, and it's good. It's good. It's a new phenomenon in our relations that hadn't existed in the Soviet Union, of course, and it didn't exist for obvious reasons of the end of the Soviet Union, when Russia simply wasn't able to do so. There are plenty of opportunities to develop economic relations, and what I see happening is an increased interest both in the United States and Russia among the business communities in seeking opportunities to work together. And most probably when the crisis is over, the economic crisis, we will see a little bit more of mutual investment than it is currently available. The crisis that happened here certainly affected us as well. And that's one of the issues that unites us, which is also new. When the crisis exploded in the United States, we didn't applaud it. We were feeling sorry about this economy because we were feeling sorry about our economy that will also be affected by the world crisis, which exactly occurred. As a result of the world crisis now, sometimes excessive dependency on the world markets in oil and gas supplies, the Russian, and metals, of course, the Russian economy contracted by 9%. It's huge. 9% instead of a steady increase in our economic growth during the last 7 years. And it was steady and pretty impressive. 9% is difficult, but it's not devastating, and we are recovering. And the Russian companies, majority of them, have been able even to pay back the debts that they had accumulated in the previous credits when they were developing their businesses. Of course, there are cases of loss of business, but not as many as we had feared initially. We also blessed to have been able to accumulate about $600 billion of reserves that were used to cushion the months of crisis. We have used up only 1/3 of it so far. And currently I saw even a little bit increase in the reserves that are still there. And the government was able even to maintain all the social economic programs that are financed out of the government budget during these times to help the least privileged to live through this different period. Not a single program was cancelled. We hope that when the crisis is over and the world economy will rebound, we will do it as fast as anybody else, and most probably even a little bit faster. The reason is that, unlike some other countries, including yours, we didn't accumulate additional debt as a result of the current crisis. We have used up some of our reserves, but we are not in big debt. So we hope that this economic development will be a little bit faster, maybe at least at the same time speed as the rest of the world. And also a new feature. We work now together, the President of the United States, President of Russia, and some other countries in the G20, trying to find out the common solutions for the current situation and to draw the plan of action that would be, if not coordinated, but harmonized between our economies, not to exploit this situation against each other, not to make the crisis worse. And it's also new to our relations. We had never worked with the United States on harmonizing our policies in economic field. And I would say, watching how these negotiations contexts are moving on, that the amount of difficulties with the U.S. position in the G20 with us is much less than we have with some other countries. And that's another new. And giving you a couple of examples of where things are developing pretty well in order to build a good basis for our relations, I would say that recently I drew a list of things that unite us and things that, on which we do not see eye to eye. And the first list, in my view, is much more important both to the national interest of the United States and, of course, for national interest of the Russian Federation. That includes certain economic crisis, and I would put it as number one today. Terrorism, on which we have been working even during difficult times and months of the political differences that we had experienced last year. We never interrupted working on terrorism. Non-proliferation, on which we had been working even at the time of the Soviet Union, but now we are working even more together, harmonizing, coordinating sometimes actions and policies. One of the less known initiative that was launched by Russia and the United States is the initiative to combat nuclear terrorism. 4 years ago, both our countries came to the conclusion that most probably one of the most difficult problems that we need to be able to cope with would be a possibility of nexus between terrorism and nuclear materials. And nobody was dealing with this issue in serious fashion. We have put forward a draft a convention at the United Nations that was approved. Russian president was the first to sign, American president, then President Bush was the second to sign. But afterwards we launched jointly, two of us, an international program to bring together the governments to fight these phenomena. The idea was that here in the United States, you take measures, you introduce legislation, you focus your law enforcement on preventing terrorism and preventing terrorism getting hold of nuclear materials. The same is happening in Russia. More or less, we are comfortable that we know that in the US and Russia measures are taken. But what about the rest of the world? And it's a big problem that we need to deal with, because terrorists would be looking for opportunities to get hold of material where they are easier to be gotten. They will use those routes of transportation that are less protected. So if you are serious about protecting even the territory of the United States or territory of Russia, you need to build a partnership that would include almost all responsible countries in the world. Otherwise, you fail. We started, two of us, at the St. Petersburg summit of 2006. Within a couple of days, we had G8 with us. Within half a year, we had all EU countries with us. Currently, we have 75 countries working with us from all regions, including Middle East, Central Asia. And I hope that within 2 to 3 years, we will be able to make it global. It's not something that is advertised each and every day in the newspapers. However, there is nothing secret about this cooperation. Each and every conference in this program adopts public declarations. But it's amazing. We co-chair it, Russia and the United States. I was privileged to co-chair 3 of the conferences of this type. And the rest of the people who are working with us are pretty comfortable working under Russian-American chairmanship. We are proud of it, we are grateful for this. But that shows that when our interests really coincide, we can work together. If you look at the issues where we do not see eye to eye, there are some. NATO expansion is one. We currently do not see any drastic activities in this field, but it is a security issue for Russia. Since NATO hasn't changed its basic function, it's still a military alliance that was designed to protect the territories of the members of the organization. It still acts on the Washington Treaty, Article 5. And sometimes when we see, for example, a would-be member of NATO attacking Russia, fully expecting that he would be supported, by, at least politically, by future allies, we ask ourselves, what would have happened had he been already in NATO and decided that he can afford a military confrontation under Russia? How explosive the situation would have been? How Article 5 would have been involved? How can we prepare ourselves for such situations? We are not yet at the situation when we fully can trust that these relations are going to be predictable and reliably cooperative. Mr. Jerejan didn't mention I was 5 years and a half ambassador of Russia to NATO. In fact, I happened to be the first Russian ambassador to present credentials to the Secretary General of NATO. We were trying to build partnership, real partnership, that we thought was possible at that time. The NATO countries at that time also were trying to build their version of this partnership. It didn't coincide, and we failed. The first failure was war in Serbia, against Serbia, that brought us apart. And the second interruption in our cooperation was because of events in Syria. So we haven't been, during all these years, trying to build real partnership, we haven't been able so far to give enough substance for this cooperation that would make these relations immune of ups and downs in political conjuncture. So we have to take it seriously, and we certainly see NATO expansion towards our borders as possible, if not a threat, but at least a source of unpredictability, especially when we see that sometimes NATO was considering a membership for a country that was headed by a less than responsible president. In the other case, we see a country, majority of people which do not want to get in NATO, but at the same time, alliance take a decision that this country will be in NATO no matter what in Bucharest summit. We look at these issues with a lot of uneasiness, because we need to care for our security and we need to be sure that we know how to provide it in all the circumstances. I'm not suggesting that all these issues now on the front burner, they are not. But we still remember that there are differences that we need to be reminded of. But what is the most important if we want to build civilized and reliable relations? That is to work honestly and seriously on issues that unite us. And in my view, there are many more than those on which we do not see eye to eye. And to work in a civilized fashion on differences that we have. That's kind of formula that both President of the United States and President of Russia recently adopted as a kind of guiding principles in our relations. And I hope it will work. However, we fully understand that it's not going to come overnight. It requires a lot of working together in order to build trust. That is something that is the key for good and reliable relations. The presidents have agreed to establish a Russian-American commission that is nominally headed by the president, and day-to-day business of the commission is coordinated by the Secretary of State and Minister of Foreign Relations. The commission includes 16 subcommissions that cover almost everything under the moon, starting from the military political environment, the group that is co-chaired by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs on the American side and the head of General Staff on the Russian side, through the economic field and up to student and culture exchanges. By the way, as far as I'm concerned, I believe that culture exchanges is important as military ones. Because if you are serious about overcoming stereotypes, you need to build objective knowledge about each other. And I think there is no better instrument to change misperceptions about each other by providing real good culture that reflects mentality and soul of the Americans and Russians. So thank you very much, and I will be more than willing to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Please raise your hands, and the Ambassador will first question here.
Yes, Mr. Ambassador, is it possible for the United States and Russia to put together a common policy in regard to Iran? And what are the policies that are important to Russia at this point in time?
I think that the term common policy is too ambitious. There is a lot of commonalities in our policies. Both the United States and Russia do not want to see Iran going nuclear in terms of not developing nuclear weapon. It's something that we have made known to our Iranian colleagues as straightforwardly as anybody else. We work together with the United States in the group of 6 that is developing both ideas on how to engage our Iranian colleagues and to find a solution that would be helpful for them and resolving the issues in nuclear field. And we have coordinated so far with a lot of differences initially, but we have coordinated our policies at the United Nations and the IAEA together. Last week we have adopted a resolution at the IAEA on the Iranian issue that expresses my country's policy and yours. So in this respect, we do have a commonality of positions. But I would say that the United States are new to this part of diplomatic activities. I happened to be participating in these negotiations for 4 years almost, and we were trying to bring our American colleagues in rather than staying out of this mechanism, because if we are all serious to find a solution, and I do not believe that can be any solution but peaceful diplomatic solution, any other option is not acceptable and wouldn't work. That means we need to have all the countries that are important. We are very glad that currently U.S. is very actively involved, and I would say honestly participating in developing creative ways of addressing this situation. So far, Iranians haven't removed the concerns about the nature of their program, and we insist that it is going to be done. In this respect, we do have commonality of view. Sometimes we differed of the assessment of what actually was happening in Iran. But quite recently, I think your official assessment has become closer to ours. You are suggesting that currently Iran doesn't develop nuclear weapon. We agree. What it had developed prior to 2003, as the U.S. government had suggested, it's still, the jury's out. But what is important that they are not developing nuclear weapon. What is important that they shouldn't develop it in the future. And the question is how to ensure it. And I would say through good diplomacy. It's going to be difficult. We do not have an easy interlocutor. They also have their own interests. Sometimes seen a little bit differently what we think is reality. But it's not a lost cause, and I hope we will work even more together in the future.
Would you comment in the same vein about the problems with the North Koreans?
By the same vein, yes. We work together also as a six, but in a little bit different format. In North Korea, we have a little bit different situation, and I would say even more difficult. The North Koreans decided to withdraw from the treaty, which they did, from the treaty banning nuclear weapons, the non-proliferation treaty. They claim that they will develop nuclear weapons. They do. Iranians are suggesting that they are not developing. They say that their laws are not allowing them to develop. They say that the supreme religious leader has banned nuclear weapons as a tool for the Muslims in Iran. They say they do not want nuclear weapons. So it's quite different a situation. Similarity mainly, we are talking about non-proliferation and we are talking about 6 parties formats. That's the only similarity. It's not easy, part of it, but I think that from the very beginning, U.S. had been much more involved in the negotiating process. We were supporting a lot. Our Chinese friends there are very important, and I would say very constructive, very constructive. But we have difficult situation with the difficult views that the government of North Korea has on this issue. But most probably the biggest contributor for the final solution, if it is found sometime, I hope it will be, would be U.S. and North Korea, because the biggest historical animosities were between these two. We will try to help. North Korea is a neighbor of ours, and we certainly are very much interested in seeing them developing in peace with themselves and with the rest of the world, because it's also about our security and stability next to our borders.
Mr. Ambassador, given the upcoming conference in Copenhagen, what is your country's policy in terms of climate change, and what do you hope to gain from this upcoming meeting of the nation?
Well, our policies are rather simple. We are willing to contribute to the solution to the gas problem, emission of the gases. We want to see to it that not only us take commitments. As to the numbers, you recently said that you decide to decrease the amount of gases that you would allow to be thrown into the atmosphere to, I think, by 17% within, 10 years. Whether we need to do the same or not, I still don't know. We need to make our calculations. But mind you, we are not the biggest pollutants today. Especially after the end of the Soviet Union, there was a significant decrease in the industrial production. We have closed a lot of factories that were polluting. Sometimes we did close them not because they were polluting, but because the economic situation has changed and they were no longer viable economic position. So by implication, that led us to a situation when we were much less polluting than many others. And in the Quito framework, we even had some, if not quarter, but some room for polluting more, which we did not. But I would say that on these issues will be normal positive contributor to the issue, but we are not the ones who will be a stumbling block, whose position is stumbling block at the conference. Yes.
We read a lot about Russia's shrinking population, which is a serious problem. Is that likely to have any impact on political philosophy, radicalization, or anything?
It does have an impact. Of course, it's something that the government is working on very energetically. You know, the population growth is first and foremost economic problem. You need to create better conditions for the people to be able to be willing to have many kids. We need them, we want it. Second issue, we need to have an improved medical care, not only in Moscow and St. Petersburg, but throughout the country, especially in the rural areas. The government has launched a number of projects. By the way, our president, Mr. Medvedev, in his previous capacity as first deputy prime minister, was responsible for these programs, both in medical care, that was a national financed program, very substantial, and also a program to encourage increased birth rate by providing financial incentives for young families. It did work sometimes, and the tendency is now good, but we are not yet there. The ratio of those who are passing away a year and those who are coming into this world is getting better, and it's steadily developing in this direction. But once again, it will depend very much on how successful we'll be in economic development, because a lot of drinking, unemployment sometimes certainly affects the expected life time for people, especially in the man population. It's a big problem. We fully understand it. We are working on that, and I hope that with the next generation of Russians, we will be much, much better off.
Mr. Ambassador, you mentioned the misconceptions that exist in this country about Ossetia. Would you comment for just a second about the Federation's relations with both Georgia and the Ukraine, and what role the United States might play in those two situations?
Well, relations with Georgia are not existent, because the president of Georgia decided to cut off diplomatic relations between our two countries. It wasn't our decision, it was his. And it certainly defines very much the environment in which you can build these relations. So state-to-state relations are non-existent, and they're bad. And I would say that most probably nobody in Russia will deal with this president. As far as we are concerned, he's guilty of killing innocent people, Russians and Ossetians. He is guilty of the death of 60 plus peacekeepers who spent 14 years on the border between Ossetia and Georgia, trying to keep peace there. He was there, they were there together with the Georgians and Ossetians. It was a trilateral format. But after his speech by President Saakashvili, announcing that he was introducing a truce in the skirmishes that were occurring at the time, in a couple of hours, they were shooting with T-72 tanks, cannons, at Russian peacekeepers, with whom they spent 14 years keeping peace. They were finishing off those wounded. And ours didn't respond for an obvious reason. First, they didn't have orders to shoot. Secondly, they didn't have means to, because there was peacekeepers. And peacekeepers didn't have anything except for Kalashnikov. And Kalashnikov isn't a match to T-72. We know it is our tank. He's guilty for lives of innocent people. As to relations between Georgians and Russia, I think that presidents come and go. Georgians will decide who is going to be their leader in the future and how they want to build relations with Russia. I'm not suggesting that everything will be changed very fast, but I'm absolutely sure that we have lived in peace and friendship with Georgians, and we will live in peace and friendship with Georgians. Time will show it. With Ukrainians, we do have good but uneasy relations. You know, we have so many ties with Ukraine since the times of the Soviet Union. family ties, economic ties. The whole economic system in the Soviet Union was organized in a way that part of the industry would be building spare parts in Ukraine and sending it to Russia, and vice versa. When we were starting building borders, suddenly was a danger of disrupting the economic development, not only for us, but for the Ukrainians as well. We have overcome a lot of differences and difficulties on this way, but not all of them. Unfortunately, the current president of the Ukrainian government chose to bring a lot of electricity in our relations. It's not our choosing, but it doesn't mean that we do not have normal good relations with the country as a whole, economic and human being to human beings. I would tell you, I'm not Russian, I'm Ukrainian. I'm proud Russian citizen and Russian ambassador, but I'm Ukrainian, and half of my family still lives there. And that's the case with many, many of us. So for us, Ukraine is not just a neighboring country. Everything that is known to be Russian now, originally, even Christianity came through Ukraine. We have always been together. And I think that we have lived not easy years sometimes in our relations, but overall normal relations. We want them to prosper because we stand to benefit from this. We want them to feel comfortable with our neighborhood, to be neighbors to us. And I think we will build that. We have difficulties, we have differences, including the drive of the current leadership to NATO, which we do not believe is a good option, especially on the backdrop of majority of Ukrainians not supporting this. And at the same time, we had difficult times with the gas problems with Ukraine. You remember that each and every New Year we had not turning off. The problem is that initially some of our gas was stolen. Sometimes we discovered that reserves that we rented in Ukraine and filled with our gas proved to be empty. And the amount of the gas that was siphoned off was very, very significant. The attempt to play on the gas prices with us was amounted to us subsidizing Ukrainian economy for several years, the level of several $billion, and the Russian taxpayers certainly didn't understand it. And when the Ukrainian leadership decided to extract from us better conditions for them, even better than had been, and cut off opportunity for us to send gas through the territory of Ukraine to Europe, then we had a crisis. Recently, we had a meeting between Mr. Putin, the Prime Minister of Russia, and Ms. Tymoshenko. They came up with an arrangement that we hope will prevent us from spending the new year at the TV screens watching how the negotiation between Gazprom and the Ukrainian government goes. I hope this year there will be no problems and we see more responsible attitude of the government of Ukraine, including in terms of paying in time for the gas purchase from Russia. And that is good. So bit by bit, with all the animosities that did exist, it's like in a family, you know. You need to live for quite a long period of time together in a new merit capacity before you know that you have a reliable long-term marriage. I think it will be also reliable with Ukraine.
We have time for one last question. It's your question.
Mr. Ambassador, will Russian troops and fleet will be removed from Crimea as originally agreed, and is there any guarantee that this will happen?
We have an agreement that provides for our fleet. There are no troops except for the fleet and the supporting system on the shore. And the agreement provides for us to be there till the year 2017. So we are planning with the acceptance of the Ukrainian government to be there till the year 2017. What is going to happen afterwards will depend on decisions of the Russian and Ukrainian government of the time. We'll see what is going to be a decision. If Ukrainian government decides to extend the treaty, that would be fine with us. But certainly, if the treaty expires and there will be no agreement for us to continue, Russian troops would move to another position.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador.
How are you?